I actually think President Biden, the whole endorsing her 30 minutes after he dropped out, I think that was a big FU to the party. You don't want me, here's somebody that you may not like, but deal with it,
Ain't nothing changed, nothing new here to see. This ain't nothing but some political maneuvering.
America.
Welcome to the eulogy, eat it up. It's called political buffoonery.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome to This Week in DUMBmocracy, where we showcase some of the dumbest newsmakers of the week. It's all over but the crying, and there certainly is a lot of that coming from the Democrat side. We just completed the 2024 election cycle. I bet you thought we'd never get to this point. And as we know by now, Donald Trump is president-elect. The Republicans have taken back control of the Senate. Donald Trump has won the popular vote. I didn't see that coming. And if the trend continues, it looks like the GOP will retain the House. A clean sweep for conservatives. And let me tell you, a lot of us are living it up right now, especially online.
What a time to be alive.
Especially because we're enjoying the cope and seethe coming from the left. The blue and non-conspiracy theories about where those other votes are. Yeah, we've been asking about that too. Where did all those votes go that were around in 2020? I wonder. But beyond all that, those in the hierarchy of the Democrat Party have begun to play the blame game. That's right, folks, ladies and gentlemen, everybody in between. Democrats are pointing the fingers at each other, left, right, and center, trying to ascertain what the hell happened to their party in this election. We're going to go through some of the blaming going around from some of the higher-ups in the party, but before we get to all that, please subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell so you don't miss any other shows, and if you like what you're seeing here in this or any other video on this very small political channel that we're hoping to grow, I'm going to ask you guys to help with that growth by smashing that thumbs up button, like, comment, share the show with your friends, all that really, really good stuff, because all that's going to help us via the YouTube algorithm. As I always say, gang, thank you so much for all that you do to help grow the channel. I appreciate all of your efforts. And for all you newbies out there who may be finding us for the first time, I hope this video earns your subscription as we go around the horn of the weekend news cycle to see what Democrats are saying about what went wrong with this campaign for Kamala Harris. We're going to get all kinds of perspectives, starting with Bernie Sanders. One of the first criticisms about the Kamala Harris campaign came from Bernie Sanders in this written statement the day after the election. It should come as no great surprise that a Democratic Party which has abandoned working class people would find that the working class has abandoned them. Woo! Coming in hot, Bernie. First, it was the white working class, and now it is Latino and black voters as well. You may recall we played this on Behind Enemy Lines last week, how Morning Joe and Al Sharpton were talking about the misogyny and indeed the racism of black and Latino voters. Remember this?
Flashback. Democrats need to be mature, and they need to be honest. And they need to say, yes, there's misogyny. But it's not just misogyny from white men. It's misogyny from Hispanic men.
Right.
It's misogyny from black men, things we've all been talking about, who do not want a woman leading them. Might be race issues with Hispanics. They don't want a black woman as president of the United States. The Democratic Party, I've always found, when you're sitting around talking, they love to just sort of balkanize everybody into these separate groups and say, oh, white people don't like women and black people. No, it is time for the Democrats to say, okay, and you and I have talked about this before, a lot of Hispanic voters have problems with black candidates.
Right.
A lot
and
of,
with other Hispanics. You've got some that don't like each other. And some of the most misogynist things I've heard going on this Get Out the Vote tour came from black men. I mean, misogynist things. So you're absolutely right. It's not simplistic. And we've got to have real honest conversations about it.
Real honest conversations.
End of flashback.
Bernie's statement went on to say that while the Democratic leadership defends the status quo, the American people are angry and want change. And they're right. Clearly, that shot against Democrat leadership did not sit well with them, and Jamie Harrison, the chair of the DNC, called it on X straight up bullshit.
Language.
Biden was the most pro-worker president of my lifetime. Saved union pensions, created millions of good-paying jobs, blah, 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 blah. You see all that. He lauds Joe Biden, and he also went on to say that there's a lot of post-election takes, and this one ain't a good one. Nancy Pelosi backed up Harrison by saying this as well.
Bernie Sanders has not won. Let me, with all due respect, and I have a great deal of respect for him, for what he stands for, but I don't respect him saying that the Democratic Party has abandoned the working class families.
As we all know, Bernie Sanders, no shrinking violet when it comes to the spotlight. He doubled down on his criticism going on the talk show circuits over the weekend.
The working class of this country is angry, and they have a reason to be angry. We are living in an economy today, Donna, where the people on top are doing phenomenally well, while 60% of our people are living paycheck to paycheck. 25% of elderly people are trying to get by on $15,000 a year or less. We have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth, and parents all over this country worry that their kids may have a lower standard of living than they do. That is the economic reality. And what Donald Trump did is provided an explanation. He went around, he said, I know you're angry, and the reason is that zillions of illegal immigrants are coming over, and they're eating your cats and dogs and everything else. That's the reason.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets.
Obviously, that is not the reason. The reason is, in my view, that we have an unprecedented level of corporate greed today, more income and wealth inequality, and people on top want it all. And we need an agenda that says to the working class, we're going to take on these powerful special interests and create an economy and a government that works for you. And by the way, that can't happen unless you get big money out of politics. We got to get rid of the Citizens United Supreme Court decision so billionaires do not continue to buy elections.
Of course, you had to throw in the socialist talking point on there as well. Unions can have their say, but businesses can't. You know the grift in the game that he plays, but that doesn't mean that Bernie Sanders doesn't have a point. A lot of the criticism that we're seeing of the Harris campaign, the DNC, and the left in general is that they've lost touch with the average American. In fact, the election results show that. Donald Trump did speak to those people. I think that is a totally fair analysis by Sanders, and the Democrats and Kamala Harris certainly didn't. They were off partying with Beyonce, throwing parties with John Bon Jovi, just going around all types of celebrities. Oprah's everywhere. Lady Gaga's giving concerts. Bruce Springsteen. The list goes on and on and on. What they didn't do was talk to the plight of the average Americans. They told them to shut up, things are fine. We need to turn the page on the bad orange man instead and keep this status quo that we established as the Biden-Harris administration the way it is. Sanders also had a comeback for Nancy Pelosi's statement saying that he didn't win.
Well, Nancy's a friend of mine, and we've worked together on many issues. But here is the reality. I have to say to Nancy, in the Senate in the last 2 years, we have not even brought forth legislation to raise the minimum wage to a living wage, despite the fact that some 20 million people in this country are working for less than $15 an hour. In America today, we have not brought, in the Senate, we have not brought to the floor the PRO Act to make it easier for workers to join unions. We're not talking about defined benefit pension plans so that our elderly can retire with security. We're not talking about lifting the cap on Social Security so that we can extend the solvency of Social Security and raise benefits. Bottom line, if you're an average working person out there, do you really think that the Democratic Party is going to the mats, taking on powerful special interests and fighting for you? I think the overwhelming answer is no, and that is what has got to change.
Bernie's gentle pushback on NBC's Meet the Press, I think, strikes the right tone, because the DNC and Nancy Pelosi are tone deaf. They're looking at every other reason possible other than their own failings to properly meet the needs of the average American, to speak to their plight and to give them solutions. I think that delusion from the leadership in the DNC is part and parcel of why they lost. But Nancy Pelosi doesn't want to deal with looking in the mirror. She wants to look at other people and point the blame at Joe Biden.
Had the president gotten out sooner, there may have been other candidates in the race. The anticipation was that if the president were to step aside, that there would be an open primary. And as I say, Kamala may have, I think she would have done well in that and been stronger going forward. But we don't know that. That didn't happen. We live with what happened. And because the president endorsed Kamala Harris immediately, that really made it almost impossible to have a primary at that time. If it had been much earlier, it would have been different.
Well, that's something I've been saying on this show for months now. Kamala Harris was never the nominee of the Democratic Party. She was the designee of the party leaders. She didn't go out there and shake everybody's hand in Iowa, go to every county, participate at the state fair, the way that other candidates on the right did. Hell, Joe Biden didn't even do that. He was the incumbent. He's above the fray. The DNC created rules that made it virtually impossible for people like Dean Phillips to confront Joe Biden with his record and make him more battle-tested as he would go through the primary process. This is not a revelation. Apparently, Nancy Pelosi is just waking up to this reality that having a designee for your party is not good enough at all. Kamala Harris was handed the vice presidency because of her immutable characteristics. Joe Biden plucked her because of what she is rather than what she stands for. And during the 2020 nomination process, she didn't even make it to the caucuses. So you expect someone who didn't do any national retail politicking, or at least no successful retail politicking, to be able to just magically put on a campaign in, a little over 100 days and beat one of the biggest campaign machines we've seen in modern history, that being the Trump campaign? They were doomed from the start. But when we come back, the finger pointing is going to continue as we're going to hear from Team Obama, the Obama camp, and also from what I believe to be a real honest broker in this whole debate about who's to blame for Kamala Harris's poor performance. Like what you see so far? Go ahead and smash that thumbs up button. Also, leave us a comment and tell us what you're thinking. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another show. So just to recap for a moment, you got Bernie Sanders and his people blaming the DNC and people like Nancy Pelosi and people in the leadership for not reaching out to working class Americans the way that Donald Trump did in providing solutions to their problems. You have the DNC calling that straight up bullshit, and Nancy Pelosi pushing back on that as well. But not only is Pelosi pushing back against Sanders, she's also blaming Joe Biden and his people for not getting out of the race soon enough. He had to wait till that debate in order to be exposed for being a poor candidate that he was. Now we're going to hear from some of the moneyed interest in the party. Luckily, we have this interview with Lindy Lee, who is a Democratic fundraiser who appeared on Fox News to give a really sobering perspective as to what the hell happened to the Democrats.
I would love to hear this.
So would I.
Lindy Lee joining us now. Lindy, we appreciate you being here. This is sort of an after analysis here of what happened with the campaign. But first, talk to me about what's going on. You see here Nancy Pelosi making the case to sort of blame Joe Biden, but it's a backhanded compliment because she's blaming Joe Biden for allowing Kamala Harris to be the nominee.
Right. Well, thank you so much for having me. And what's left unsaid is that she is not forcefully saying that Harris would have been the strongest candidate after a rigorous process. She's not saying definitively that it would have been her. She says it might have been her, but, maybe there was an alternative. Maybe it was Josh Shapiro or maybe Gretchen Whitmer, someone who could forcefully litigate the case against Donald Trump. And if you truly believe that Trump is an existential threat, and that's what Democrats have been saying for the past couple of years, then you should have had that process instead of just coronating somebody.
That's a great point by Miss Lee here. They didn't go through the process. She was the designee. It's the point we've been making on this channel for months. If there would have been a sort of quick and dirty primary process where other candidates would have been heard, would Kamala Harris have been the designee? Would she have been the nominee? We don't know that. And I find it very interesting and kind of ironic how Lindy Lee used the phrase litigating the case against Trump when you had a litigator in Kamala Harris, and that was sort of the basis of her campaign. But the point does remain that if the Democrats had actually followed the democratic process of nominating a candidate, maybe you would have ended up with a better candidate. What a freaking concept, right?
What is the relationship? What has been the relationship throughout the campaign, and what do you think the relationship is today between Biden world and Kamala Harris world?
Well, I have friends, in both worlds. And let me tell you, the relationship was terrible even before the campaign. There was backstabbing. They wanted to hand her the most, least favorable agenda, the legislative priorities. She was stuck with immigration, civil rights, like none of that went
Before
anywhere.
she was even a candidate,
exactly.
you're saying,
And
as vice president.
There was a lot of backstabbing we saw in the press. People were leaking stuff all the time. The White House was leaking like a sieve when it came to Kamala Harris. And finally, in the final year, she was able to stabilize and stop the bleeding of her staff because there was a lot of turnover as well. And we saw the press reports about that. And things have finally started to calm down. And I actually think President Biden, the whole endorsing her 30 minutes after he dropped out, I think that was a big FU to the party.
Oh, I love that take. Again, there seems to be no spin coming from Lindy Lee here. She's speaking openly and honestly, a very raw take from a Democrat who is confronting this loss pretty intellectually. I didn't think that Biden hated Harris so much that he was giving her the shit jobs to do, but it kind of makes sense when you think that she was the border czar and she was handling issues that weren't really front and center. She was getting a lot of the crap positions. They were hiding her in the background because they didn't want the word salads. They didn't want the embarrassment. They didn't want the cackling from Kamala Harris. And Lindy Lee is also speaking truth when it came to this overturn of staff at the vice president's mansion. Definitely very good points. Did Joe Biden really sabotage her, though? It's fun to think about, don't you think? I always thought that the power in the White House wasn't Joe Biden, but it was Jill Biden. And that's why she was so upset about them pushing Joe out of the race. That's just my opinion, total speculation on that. I don't have any sources on that, but that's just my observations of what I'm seeing. And it seems like Lindy Lee has those same observations.
You don't want me, here's somebody that you may not like, but deal with it,
Suggesting that he's sticking the party with Kamala
Kind of
Harris.
like sticking it to the man.
Yeah, but okay, help me understand your perspective on that, because you worked for Kamala Harris.
I didn't. I'm a donor.
You're a donor.
Technically, I'm not on anyone's payroll. I'm not beholden to anyone. That's why I'm here telling the truth. I'm not here to gaslight anybody. This is just the truth.
And what is the truth?
The truth is this is just an epic disaster. This is a $1 billion disaster. Actually, it was $1.018 billion, I think, right? There were $20 million or $18 million in debt.
Right.
It's incredible. And I raised millions of that. I have friends that I have to be accountable to and to explain what happened because I told them it was a margin of error race. I was promised, Jen O'Malley Dillon promised all of us that Harris would win. She even put videos out saying that Harris would win. I believed her. My donors believed her. And so they wrote massive checks. I feel like a lot of us were misled. And even on the night of election night, Will, I looked somebody in the eye and I said, are we going to do this? Are we going to pull it off? She told me yes. And I asked somebody else, how are you feeling? He's like, we're going to win Iowa. And I was like, what?
There's a sucker born every minute.
I guess someone believed that poll from Ann Selzer that came out of Iowa that had Harris +3 ended up going double digits for Trump. Even the campaign seems delusional here, seems out of touch with reality, if you're listening and believing Lindy Lee here. Very, very interesting take. I appreciate her honesty, and I appreciate the fact that she points out that she's not bought and paid for by anyone. She's not issuing talking points, and you can hear the ring of truth and honesty coming from her. I guess I should say candor rather than honesty, because we don't know absolutely what the facts are here. She's definitely giving her opinion on this, but she's being unabashed and unapologetic in giving that opinion.
this going in? Was there a real sense of false confidence on the side of Kamala Harris, or did they know they were in store for disaster?
I was wondering about that. I was like, I asked them, are you privy to internal numbers that I am not seeing? Because I study this so carefully, and I just wasn't seeing any basis for that level of confidence. And I also want to remind our viewers that, the Trump campaign was touting all of these incredible empirical data weeks before election night. What Harris is touting was the door knocking. She didn't say anything really about early voting. Now I know it's because there was nothing much to say.
If you recall from our show Behind Enemy Lines that we do live every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, we were going through those numbers. We were looking at the numbers that were out there in the battleground states, how many votes had come in, what was the difference between 2024 and 2020, all that good stuff. We were checking the RCP average every week. Kamala Harris's campaign, I guess, wasn't doing that. They were working on vibes. They were working on door knocking, the subjective opinion of a door knocker going into someone's door to see if they're going to go out to vote. The thing about people showing up at your door during election season, everyone, me, you, everybody thinks it's a turnoff. It's something we have to deal with. We say what we need to say to get rid of the person at the door. Are you voting for Kamala Harris? Yeah, sure, I'm showing up to vote later. That's not data. That's not objective, factual information. That's subjective based upon the response of the person you're door knocking, the door knocker themselves taking down that information and reporting it to their supervisor, and how it goes up the chain. There's a lot of different hands and a lot of different filters that information goes through, and it doesn't become objective anymore. It becomes very subjective and open to interpretation. Again, great point by Lindy Lee here.
She really seems to know her stuff.
I asked you what the relationship was between Biden world and Kamala Harris world, and you told me it was bad. It was bad predating the campaign. Where does Obama world fit in this? There's. I don't want to break the Democratic Party into these, three fiefdoms, because there's probably more. Nancy Pelosi is a huge power player, but Barack Obama, the Obama world, is a huge player. How do they fit in the tension or the happiness of Democrats?
Before we get to Lindy Lee's answer, I think we have some closer sources to Obama world to respond to that. That would be Jon Favreau. No, not that one, the other one, the political one, who hosts Pod Save America, who had this to say about the interaction between Team Obama and Team Biden.
Joe Biden's decision to run for president again was a catastrophic mistake. It just was. And he and his inner circle, they refused to believe the polls. They refused to believe he was unpopular. They refused to acknowledge until very late that anyone could be upset about inflation, and they just kept telling us that his presidency was historic and it was the greatest economy ever. We just heard him again say that it's the greatest economy ever. Clearly, 70-80% of voters don't believe that. They don't believe that about their own personal financial situation, but they just keep telling us that. And then after the debate, the Biden people told us that the polls were fine, and Biden was still the strongest candidate. They were privately telling reporters at the time that Kamala Harris couldn't win. So they were shivving Kamala Harris to reporters while they told everyone else, not a time for an open process, and his vice president can't win, so he's the strongest candidate. Then we find out, when the Biden campaign becomes the Harris campaign, that the Biden campaign's own internal polling, at the time when they were telling us he was the strongest candidate, showed that Donald Trump was going to win 400 electoral votes. That's what their own internal polling said.
Damn! There were polls showing 80% of voters thought Joe Biden was too old to get a second term before the debate. And then we all watched the debate. And then in the last few weeks, Biden was campaigning, and he said, we need to lock Trump up. He created a controversy over whether Trump supporters were garbage. He said, the weird thing about slapping Trump on the ass. Like, his moments on the campaign trail weren't flawless either.
You cannot.
It's absurd.
It's
absurd. Trying to be generous here.
I'm done being generous.
With that tension and that perspective in mind, let's see what Lindy Lee has to add to this conversation.
That's a really good question. I want to point out that they waited 3 days. Michelle and Barack Obama waited 3 days to endorse Kamala Harris. It was a silence heard around the world. And prior to Biden's endorsement that no one really anticipated, they were vetting people like Mark Kelly. Kamala Harris wasn't at the top of the ticket. So Biden's endorsement of Harris caught a lot of people off guard.
That's true. If you think back to that time, Joe Biden did quickly endorsed Kamala Harris, kind of sucked the air out of the room. Goes back to that whole thing that Lindy Lee was talking about, how maybe Biden foisted Kamala Harris onto the Democratic Party as sort of the FU on the way out. And by sucking the air out of that room, what happened was you didn't get the primaries that Nancy Pelosi anticipated. You kind of had the Obama team on the back foot, not knowing what to do for 3 days. Those pieces are coming together of all the things that we've been talking about on this show for months now. I didn't realize how right we were.
Even the chieftains of the party. I really think it was a big FU to everyone. I'm so sorry.
It's all right. I think
she cursed on air. Oh, that's cute. Again, another sign that she's unfiltered, unapologetic, unabashed, giving you the raw take from her perspective. It just lends to her credibility that she had that little faux pas on the air.
I think I'm getting a vivid picture.
I didn't finish the word.
Specifically when it comes to why, or the effect, and perhaps the plan on when Joe Biden endorsed Kamala Harris.
Lindy Lee really did provide some really good perspective for us, an honest take of what things look like now within the Democratic Party, within all these fiefdoms going on. Team Obama pointing at Team Biden, Nancy Pelosi pointing at Team Biden, the DNC pointing at Bernie Sanders, and they're pointing at each other, fighting back here. It's one giant clusterfuck right now. And within that clusterfuck is this stark reality that no one but people on the outer layers is looking to confront. The DNC is not ready to say that they failed reaching out to voters that in 2020 were all in for them. Kamala Harris didn't just lose the conservative voters that you would normally lose. She lost independents, and she lost some left-leaning center voters as well. You saw that in the numbers that you're seeing right now. Last I checked, we're winning the popular vote. Trump's winning the popular vote. You see that map on the New York Times with all the arrows pointing to the right, those red arrows in all the counties, and in a big way. Hell, New York was only decided by 11% when it was, I think, 23% in 2020. New Jersey is now being discussed as being a possible swing state in the coming elections. That's the damage that this Democratic Party did. And they did this damage by not reaching out to everyday average Americans, the normies that are out there, that decided that since the Democrats weren't addressing their problems, and that Donald Trump was, in his own Trumpian way, that they were going to turn the page and not look back. They were unburdened by what has been with the Democratic Party.
I see what you did there.
But hey, listen, that's just my opinion on all this stuff. I don't know what you guys think. Are you still basking in the afterglow of the historic comeback, the greatest comeback in American political history that happened last week? Are you concerned that there will be forces within the Republican Party that will try to stop the Trump train from running roughshod? Are you even remotely concerned about what Democrats are doing right now to try to cope and seethe and mold over these results and the finger pointing that's going on that we discussed? Let me know what you think in the comments. And as always, like and share this video with your friends, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the shows. I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys are saying and thinking out there, not only about this video, but all of the shenanigans and buffoonery happening every day this week in DUMBmocracy.
All views and opinions expressed here are not necessarily of the mainstream media and may offend some listeners. It's called political buffoonery.